Hey there, I'm Monica from the Expert Circle at Kontent.ai, and today I'm happy to be sharing airtime with my colleague Mike Berry for Q&A ahead of his demo of the Kontent.ai's MCP server. So, hey Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Could you introduce yourself to folks watching?
Sure. Hey, Monica. Thanks for having me. I'm Mike Berry. I'm the Director of Consulting Services at Kontent.ai, and I'm really excited to show off our MCP server. Coming from the consulting team, the MCP server is going to be a big deal to my team and our customers because it's going to really streamline a lot of processes and help customers get the most out of the platform.
Awesome. So let's dive into this Q&A. Can you give us a quick overview of what we're going to be seeing today?
Yeah, sure. In the demonstration, I'm taking a visual representative of a content model, a visual representation, and feeding that to the Kontent.ai MCP server that generates that content model in Kontent.ai directly in the CMS. I run a model generator to create code files from those content types. And then I also use the GitHub MCP server to push those code files to a GitHub repo. All of this is done via an agent. So, no terminal commands, no API calls, just using a GitHub Copilot to push those code files to GitHub and generate that content model.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So how'd you get the idea to do this?
So on consulting, we see a lot of requests for proofs of concepts where customers of varying, technical acumen and technical backgrounds, they want to rapidly prototype different content types or different content models, but they have some hesitation. They're thinking that there might be too much of an implementation barrier or it might take too long to get a prototype put together quickly. In consulting, we really emphasize the importance of a solid content model, and we have our customers go through pretty deep and vast exercises to plan content models in a visual format and get a lot of collaborators from different teams and different stakeholders validating that content model in a diagram. So effectively in consulting, we were trying to think of ways to streamline that process and make it a lot easier. Because after this large collaborative process of people providing insights on the content model and all this diagramming, they feel at the end that it's perhaps a tedious endeavor to take that large body of work and then having to manually input it into the CMS. So that was some inspiration for focusing on creating content types with the Kontent.ai MCP server. And I just wanted to extend that scenario a little further into the prototyping scenario where, I thought it would be really cool to also have an agent automate that process to creating those front-end code files and then take it a step further and push those code files out to a location where the rest of the team could use those files.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thanks for the intro. And I'm curious, just to lay it out, what are some of the tools and services you'll be using in the demo once we check it out? And you already talked a little bit about what you're trying to achieve, but are there some specific goals that you're really looking forward to testing out?
Yeah, so in the demo, I use Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot. That's the agent I use. I use the Kontent.ai MCP server. I use the GitHub MCP server, and I use the Kontent.ai TypeScript model generator. So those are the tools that I used. The end goal, I initially start with the idea that I wanted to see how much time savings these tools could provide and how I could get, a prototype really rapidly put in place and distribute those code files very quickly. And in the end, it wasn't massive time savings, but there was a huge cognitive load savings where the agent was really walking me through alterations that needed to be made before I could accomplish, creating the content model. And it was also making adjustments to the GitHub commands and actually pushing that content out. So initially I was thinking about speed, but in the end, I was really about a cognitive load savings and really a reduced level of effort and level of technical expertise required from me.
Oh man, I bet folks are going to be interested in really, yeah, seeing what that process is like once you walk them through it. So, I'm a marketer and I'm a content creator, so I'm a little bit nervous, but I wanted to ask you, so like how much coding or knowledge of command line tools is necessary for someone to do something similar to what you're doing here?
So in the non-production environment, in like a prototyping, ideation situation, really not much. It was configuring the MCP server in Visual Studio Code. It was setting up the command for the front-end model generator. But all of that's really well documented in the READMEs of the respective repos. And setting up MCP servers in an IDE like Visual Studio Code is also very well documented and pretty easy to digest. I do mention non-production because I use GitHub. I use the GitHub MCP, and I would say just a disclaimer, and I think developers will appreciate this. You should use the GitHub MCP in like a non-production environment. You shouldn't just trust the agent completely at this point with making Git commands against your production repositories, because it can cause some developer pain in the future. So I'd say the technical barrier to entry is quite low in a prototyping scenario, but proceed with caution when it comes to more production scenarios that you're looking at.
I think that is a totally fair disclaimer. So, cool. So we've had a bit of context. We've been teasing a little bit MCP server already. So can you just, in plain language, give a brief overview of the MCP server?
Yeah, so the MCP server really automates creating structured content. So the content model, that's content types, that's taxonomies, that's content type snippets. You can use natural language with the MCP server and an agent to create those entities in the CMS conversationally. So you're not having to go into the UI and drag and drop. You're not having to pine through the API reference documentation to create some management API script to create these entities through a console. You can just have a pretty natural conversation with an agent, and it will translate that conversation into the proper actions that will create those entities in the CMS. So that, at a really high level, is what's happening. I mean, there's a lot more technical detail associated with that, but if I do explain it clearly in digestible terms, that's what the tool is doing. It's supporting content types right now, and we plan on expanding that footprint and focusing on content items and language variants and more opportunities for less technical users to interface with their Kontent.ai project using the MCP server.
That sounds great. So I'd like to ask a little bit. You've already touched on this nicely. So why would you say that MCP server is like exciting for developers and teams working with Kontent.ai CMS?
So developers specifically, I think, there's going to be a massive time savings for somebody, developers, especially developers who are new to the Kontent.ai, ecosystem or API. Instead of having to put a ton of time into API references and understanding a lot of implementation detail, the MCP server is going to allow them to also have, take a conversational approach to creating some entities in the CMS or changing some entities in the CMS. And we're hoping in the future to be able to do that at scale. So instead of having to learn a lot of ins and outs about the API and creating these programmatic scripts, they can tackle it in a more conversational way, which should give them a huge time savings. I think developers as well will be able to maybe offload some tasks that previously non-technical users felt they needed developer support to do. Now they can point those less technical users towards the MCP, and that should facilitate some of that for them. So the developers can spend their cycles on more, let's say, involved or really technical and developer heavy activities that I think most of them want to be spending their time on.
So if you were talking to our customers or some of the non-technical users of our customers, what sort of benefits would you let them know about the MCP server? Maybe not now, but in the future even.
Well, even now, I think, non-technical or less technical users can reap a lot of advantages, right? So, an example I had in my mind while I was using the MCP server was, let's say I want to make a drop-down element or a taxonomy element that contains, all 195 countries, in the world. From a manual perspective, dragging and dropping and typing 195 entities is not a great task.
Yeah, for sure.
And to automate that, previously you would have to learn about the management API and do it in a technical way. So the MCP server allows you to create a prompt and have that activity done pretty seamlessly without having to tap on your developers. And you don't have to sit there and drag and drop a bunch of entities in a UI and take a lot of time to do that. So I think they immediately benefit from activities like that. I also think it's going to be really empowering for non-technical or less technical users in the future when they can, conversationally interface with the content that's in the CMS without having to navigate nested UI structures or really take a lot of time filtering and searching through different buttons and clicks. Non-technical users in the future, I can foresee them prompting about the content they care about most, and with low or no clicks, being able to immediately access that content and analyze it or use it for whatever purpose they need in a business context.
That is a future I'm also looking forward to. So that sounds great. If we want to look at potential workflow or even integration possibilities with the MCP server, which ones sort of are interesting to you or stand out?
Yeah, I think I've been really focused on the rapid prototyping story at the moment. That's a really impactful internal story for us as well, because we want to generate really quality POCs really quickly and get those back to the customer quickly. From the customer angle, I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities for feeding actual content into other services like Figma that also have MCP servers, and you don't need a lot of implementation acumen to make that happen if they have a quality MCP server on their side. So you could, mock up a content model quickly, get that into Kontent.ai, feed that information to MCP into that Figma MCP and into that mockup quickly, and now you have a more connected story between the presentation and the content model or the content in the CMS. For future state for developers, I can see a lot of opportunity for workflow integrations with the content model, Kontent.ai MCP server, and component generators. So actually taking that content model and the content from the CMS, feeding that into some component generator library. It could be, again, Figma MCP or something similar, and actually draft up components that are rooted in the reality of the content model or the content that needs to be presented.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to hear your perspective. We talk a lot about this internally and even in our marketing materials. So what has you personally excited about agentic content management?
It strips a lot of the friction away from content teams where they feel like they have a lot of great ideas, but it almost, when I work with customers, it almost feels like they feel guilty sometimes to tap on those technical resources to actualize those ideas. So they either sit on a great content idea or content model idea or schema idea, and it's never realized because they never ask, or they have to go through this lengthy process and try to find time in a development cycle to make those ideas come to life. Where with MCP and agentic content, a lot of these less technical users will feel really empowered to take their ideas and start experimenting with them, putting them into practice. I'm also, really excited about Agentic CMS in general, because it's just going to make content creation and content ideation a lot faster. We're going to be able to automate a lot of compliance checks, branding check. There's going to be a lot of ability to create creative projects and implement them without having to spend a lot of time or resources or really high learning curves to get those ideas into the system.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the excitement is reducing that friction, the speed of execution, and people feeling really empowered to bring their ideas to life without feeling guilty about, taxing the team or anything like that.
That's so funny that you bring that up. Now I'm thinking anytime I, reach out to our development, I'm always using like prayer hand emojis or like little angel emojis or something. Thankfully, we have a really good rapport, and our development understands the business use case quite a bit. But I can imagine in even larger organizations, sometimes that personal relationship can be fraught with a little bit more guilt. So that's a great way to frame it, and it's nice to sort of lift that guilt and see the potential of executing on some of these ideas that we have. So thanks for sharing. That's cool. So we're about to get started. Is there anything you really want us to keep in mind when we are watching the demo?
Yeah, sure. So, we're talking a lot in like a visionary sense and, the ideal state of MCP and how these, workflows of various MCP servers will tie together and automate a lot of process. But we're pretty early in the process and pretty early in the experimentation phases. So the video is very like a raw Friday personal development time recording. So it's not polished. There's no branding. It's very much, me speaking my thoughts out loud during some experimentation time. There's no script, just some bullet points on a notepad, my headset, my hat, and just really going for it. And how I would do some experimentation really, naturally, very genuinely. So not this really overly produced packaged piece of work, but just seeing me in the thick of it in real time and trying to experiment with a really cool technology that I think will have some pretty massive impact moving forward.
That's awesome. And I think that's sort of that experimental enthusiasm is one of the reasons why we also wanted to share it with our community. So I'm really happy that you were open to doing that, and help other people think some of these new thoughts that maybe, having that sort of body double there to think these things and to consider new opportunities is really special. So thank you for sharing. I'm curious, is there anything you're already like itching to try out next?
Yeah, I'm queued up to test the item invariant support that's been added to the MCP server. I think that's a huge step towards realizing that frictionless journey for less technical users. That's super exciting to me. I think it's a huge advancement for the MCP server itself. I'm also working on a few other AI workflows that don't leverage MCP, but they're also contributing to that story where, less technical users might want to link into some automated brand compliance checks. So that's another demo that I'm working on. And if people appreciate this kind of demo, that's something we could create more of. So I'd be asking the audience to chime in if this is something that they appreciate and like to watch.
Awesome. So we're on the countdown. Is there anything you want to share about how people can get involved or how they can get started with our MCP server?
Yeah, go to the Kontent.ai GitHub repo, try out the MCP server for yourself, submit issues, submit feature requests, tell us how you want to leverage MCP in your content management stories, share that tool with your friends that are in the space, see what they think about it, and really truly give us your transparent feedback, because we don't want to work on this technology just for the sake of working on new technology or advancements. We want to align this technology with activities that will really make your content management lives easier.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this Q&A ahead of it, and we can start watching.
Okay, thank you. the rapid prototyping story with our MCP server, I started to think about other elements that we could maybe speed up for the developer experience, or things we could do with an agent that would help them avoid some implementation detail, or really just make the process faster, going from an ideation phase around a diagram, creating that content model, and generating the front-end code files for that content model, and then maybe pushing that to a shared repository like on GitHub or something that other developers on the team could use, or that they could start using in once they start coding their prototype. So what I've done and what I'll be showing in this demonstration is I have the content MCP server ready to go, the configuration there, and then I've added the GitHub MCP servers tooling as well. So when I take a look at my tooling, I can see we have all of the things that are a part of the content MCP here, and you can see that GitHub has a pretty extensive set of tooling already available, which is great because if you want to do everything agentically, then you don't have to deal with Git commands or knowing their API or anything like that. You can just communicate with the agent. So, of course, there's a lot of risk using GitHub with an agent in an LLM, how it interprets. So nothing I would recommend in a production setting, but for the prototyping story, I think it makes a lot of sense to speed up this prototyping path. So for the demo, what we'll do is we'll generate a content model off of a diagram, which I pulled from Learn. We will use the content model generator, which I already have installed globally, but I have a little command file here to help the LLM along in terms of the structure when I actually want to call the model generator. And then we also, I have a bunch of prompts off screen here that I'll send in. And we'll see how the agent does. I'm using GPT-4.1. I've heard that Claude 4.0 is slightly better, especially when it comes to creating things like content types with linked items, but I don't have access to that right now, so I'm just going to use GPT-4.1 in VS Code with the Copilot. So let's just get started. I'm going to pull up those commands. And let's start here. So I'm telling the agent to create the content model from the reference diagram. I wanted to create the snippet first, taxonomy group second, then the content types, and I wanted to try and create the lowest child in the linked items chain first and proceed up to the parent. So this is pretty specific in terms of direction. Again, I've heard the other LLMs are a little more intelligent when it comes to the order and creating content types, but I'm just going to help the agent along, 4.1 along, with these set of stipulations here. So let's see how it goes. Of course, you can think about, okay, there might be some limitations, especially if there's like circular references, and I think that the outputs really depend on the quality of the diagram. But let's see what happens here. So the snippet worked fine, created that pretty easily. This is a pretty small taxonomy group, not a lot of terms in it, no nested terms, so it did fine there. But this is where we might run into some complications as we do the content types. So that content type coffee picture worked fine. Doesn't seem to be any linked items or modular content in there. But here we're running into a bit of an issue. Flat white due to a schema issue. It appears as a mismatch for the pictures, linked items, and food metadata snippet fields in the flat white content type. It's going to adjust it. Great. I want this agent to try to make adjustments and make it right. There might be some issue with the guidelines, but let's see how it does, see if it can self-correct. Looks like not. It's just going to have the blank guidelines. That's fine, and now it's going to try breakfast. And that worked fine. So my guidance was helpful, I guess, with how to handle that linked content in the initial prompt. And the agent did some corrections to itself and created the content types. Let's go check them out in the project. There are my 3 types there. Great. My snippet and my taxonomy group with 3 terms. So here we go, doing well. So let's go to the next part, which let's generate the front-end models, the TypeScript models. So I'm just telling it to run the model generator with the current model generator command in my commands, but I wanted to replace these values in that command. So let's go. Of course, you could just copy and paste this and run the command through terminal, but again, I want to lean into the agent a little bit, just in case, maybe we separate this into a different UI, or I really want to try and test the limits of the agents here. So came up with this command, looks pretty good. Now it's running in the terminal the outputs of the model generator itself. So this is just part of the model generator tooling. It's going to give me a little report on what it is generating, and yeah, it looks like it generated those types just fine, taxonomies, and some of the additional TypeScript files that come through with the generator. You can see that it has an output dir model, which I put that in the command here in this command structure. So that did pretty well. So now here comes the next part of this whole journey, which is we have some code files here. We have some content types in Kontent.ai. How quickly can we create a GitHub repo, push these files into that repo, and for next steps after that, we'll try to create a new branch and maybe add a new type through this process again to see if we can get some sort of rolling developer scenario here of how they can use the agent. So let's start tapping into the GitHub tooling. So I want it to create a private repository in my GitHub account called MCP Model Testing 1. I've already authorized VS Code to access my GitHub account, so you might have to do some authorization, but this was already set up in advance to me recording. Great, created it. Let's take a look. Great. So very simple repo created, MCP model testing repository for MCP model testing. Okay, not a very descriptive README, but something you could, with the agent, work on creating a README for it and then pushing that README. We're not going to do that today, but let's try to push the model folder now. Let's push the models folder, let's say in this code base, to the MCP model testing 1 repo you just made into the main branch. Great, so let's see how it does. So again, we've created the content model in Kontent.ai. We generated that model directory in our code project here, and now we're trying to push it up to somewhere where we can share it. Okay, so it looks like there was an error in the terminal. Let's continue, and I'm just gonna let the agent do everything for me. I'm just gonna be lazy about it and assume that it's doing the right thing, and so let's go. Continue, okay. All right, it's pushing it, and we might run into an issue because of that README that was created. But again, I'm just gonna let the agent do its thing, keep it going. All right, I can see that it added that README local. We're gonna push. Okay, cool. So it pushed the folder up. So let's take a look at that repository. Go to my repositories here. Model testing 1, nice private repository, and there are our generated content types. Great. So did all that without me having to really interface with any Git commands. It made corrections for itself. It saw that, hey, the README wasn't local, pulled it in, and then pushed this directory out there. So now we have this set up. I can start iterating on the content model as well. So let's say I want to incrementally, add to my content types in Kontent.ai. Let's try to do this quickly. So create a new content type called person, and it'll have first name as text, last name as text, image as text, and biography as rich text. So we're tapping back into that Kontent.ai MCP server, trying to create that new content type. Creating that new person. All right, awesome. I want to, let's regenerate the content model in this application using that generator. Let's go watch over here to see if our content types change. All right, gives me the command. And of course, if you're really trusting of the agent, you could, I think a lot of these IDEs now, you have like a mode you can activate that automatically hits continue for you. So you don't have to manually interface at all, but I don't think that's a terribly good idea, to be completely honest. Let's see, it regenerated, and let's see, we have person brand new, awesome. So I actually do want to do what the agent is suggesting, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I want to create a new branch called adds person, and I want to create a pull request, and let's see if it can handle it. So again, this is all through the agent. I don't have to go out to GitHub. I'm not using the terminal. I can have a really, high level knowledge of how GitHub works. So it's creating the branch. Great. Switch to the new branch. You can see the terminal is also reporting back on what it's trying to do. Let's check it out. All right, let's add the person content type model. Looks like it's having a lot of issues with these ampersands here in the terminal. But again, I've been able to be completely lazy about this and just hit the continue button pretty much over and over and over again. So we're going to try to do a pull request, so a little more complicated, and seems to be fine. Cool. It even gives me a link right to the pull request. Awesome. So we could even merge this pull request, but let's actually go and check out that the branches were made correctly. Yeah, adds person. Adds person now. Okay, awesome. So that worked out pretty well. So, in sort of conclusion here, it didn't save me a ton of time, but I could be completely lazy about it. And this agent did a lot of self-corrections. I could definitely see opportunities to sort of streamline some of this. I'm thinking that if we used a more advanced LLM, we would get even better results there. So maybe you do get some time savings there, but this could be, a pretty useful cycle of, all right, now I'm adding another content type, which can be facilitated through this agent. Okay, great. Now go regenerate the model quickly and then push it to GitHub. I mean, you could write those commands out more specifically here and then just have the agent execute. But I don't know what the total time savings there are, but it's some cool things to think about, especially with the amount of coverage that GitHub has over its commands. I can see this being useful for generating the README and pushing it right from within the project here. From again, creating those
pull requests and having, it generate some detail about the pull requests. I can see where it can be valuable.